So in the meantime, what I want to just go through is the comments around people who are sharing around why you're here today. So Liz, kia ora Liz, thank you for joining us. Says I'm responsible for onboarding and on a journey to make it better for new starters. Fantastic, thank you for coming along. Joe, kia ora Joe, thank you for joining us. Says I have a goal for next year for a better induction process. Yeah, I think there'll be plenty here today that you find useful. Debbie says she's keen to learn about induction processes. Kia ora Debbie, thank you for joining us. Alana says we'd like to know more about how we can use MyHR in the onboarding process. Fantastic. I've got a very short demo at the end of my content today to show, to demonstrate the MyHR onboarding model and how we can use that. And a couple of people are saying yes now, that's just the main presentation view. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your feedback. Andrew, kia ora Andrew, thanks for coming along, says keen to understand more about how to balance rigor in process with speed to bring a person on board. Oh man, that's the $1 million question, Andrew. Thanks for coming along. That's a really good one to raise. Emily says she'd like to be confident to train her managers in this area. Kia ora, Emily. That's a really good, definitely something we want to be upskilling our management team on. Annalise, kia ora, Annalise says she'd like to learn more about induction processes and overall understanding of the MyHR platform. Fantastic. And a couple more. Donna says that they are changing roles within the organisation, so inducting from one team to the other and also looking at a better system for managing staff policies. Perfect. We'll cover off some of that today, Donna. Awesome. Lovely. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. I appreciate knowing what your context is. What it does allow me to do is to manage the examples that I use in a more thoughtful and more effective way. So it means that you'll hopefully get more out of today's session. So thank you so much for putting in your comments. Now we'll get started then. So in terms of the agenda for today, there's a few things that we'll cover off as always. We'll first talk about the 4 C's model of onboarding. So we have a model for thinking about onboarding and where we might be spending some of our time and attention. We'll then go through what each of those C's are about. So we'll talk about compliance, which is the basics. We'll look at connection, which is all about relationships. We'll talk about clarification, so measuring success and being really clear about the purpose of onboarding. We'll talk about culture and engagement and about making sure that your new starters feel welcome in the organisation. We'll talk about remote onboarding and how that can be challenging, but not impossible, especially given so many of us now are working in hybrid workplaces. We'll look at using tech to make onboarding easier and why you might be thinking about putting some technology behind your onboarding processes. And as I've mentioned already, we'll have a short demo of MyHR's onboarding module, and then we'll wrap up for questions. So we're currently at 1:10. My goal is to have all of that done in about 35 to 40 minutes so that we've got 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So we'll blast through, and again, if anything comes up as we go along, you're welcome to put that into the Q&A and I'll pick it up at the end. So onboarding is any period of time where you have someone coming into a new business or a new role or a new team. It typically lasts between 2 months and 6 months, kind of depending. When HR people talk about onboarding, we tend to talk about induction as in the formal activities or documents or processes or sessions or conversations that we have to manage someone's onboarding experience. And onboarding tends to kind of be the bucket within induction activities happen. But it matters for a few different reasons, and that's why we've got 115 people on the webinar today to learn about onboarding. So the first thing to note is it happens whether you pay attention to it or not, right? So whether you are sitting with someone with an induction plan and you're checking it off week by week, or whether you're throwing someone in the deep end, they are going to be learning about their job. They're going to be trying to use tools and systems. They're going to be looking to other people in their team or in the organization who are role modeling behavior that might be helpful or might not. So whether you put attention into this or not, onboarding happens in your business anytime you have a new person come in or anytime you have someone change roles or change teams. So given it happens regardless, it's a good idea to put some attention and put some time into making sure it's an effective process, because if we don't, it'll just kind of happen organically, and maybe that's okay, but maybe we want to be a bit more intentional about our onboarding experience. Of course, we're trying to manage legal risk and liability here too. I'd be remiss if I didn't point that out. So this is where we're getting our policy signed. In New Zealand, if you're managing probation or trial periods, the onboarding process is a really key part of being able to use those provisions in your employment agreements. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our employees healthy and safe. We're crossing our T's and dotting our I's and making sure that we're reducing risk to our business and to our employees as well. Hands up if you've started a new job. I'm pretty sure all of us have. We know it can be a stressful time. We feel a bit at sea. We can feel a bit on the back foot, maybe if we're joining a really well-established team or a really well-established business. So what we want to try and do with a good onboarding program is to reduce stress and uncertainty for our employees so that they can get up and running and not be carrying too much stress or too much uncertainty about their role and about what's expected of them. We also want to improve employee retention. So we know in New Zealand that about 12% of new employees don't make it through their 90-day, their kind of first 12 weeks of employment, their first 90 days. And that's quite a high number. So for every 10 hires, one of them doesn't make it to the end of 3 months. And what we know is that effective employee onboarding can improve employee retention by 82%, not just in that first 3 months, but in the first year of them being in the organization. So if recruiting is painful, as it is for most of us, recruitment is very much an art, not a science. And if you want to avoid having to go to market all the time, have a think about putting some effort and attention into your employee onboarding process, because you're less likely to have high employee turnover and therefore less likely to be going to market often. And lastly, it increases employee satisfaction. So we know that thoughtful, intentional onboarding processes reduce stress and uncertainty. They make us feel more connected to our colleagues and to the business. It's clear what's expected of us, and all of those are really important predictors of employees having high job satisfaction. And we care about job satisfaction because people who are satisfied with their work will go above and beyond. They're more likely to engage in good, like organizational citizenship behaviors, like helping out a colleague and organizing morning teas and staying late if they need to. So job satisfaction is important, not just because we want to make employees happy, although for some of us that's really important, but because it leads to good organizational outcomes as well. So when we think about onboarding, what does this include? What are the activities? What are the processes? What do we need to be mindful of here? And the model that we like to use is the 4 C's, starting off with compliance. So we'll go into this in more detail, but it's basically your policies, making sure your employee is set up in payroll, making sure they have the tools and systems access, if that's a laptop, if that's a company vehicle, if that's particular softwares, all of the basics needed to get someone up and running. And then we come to talking about clarification. So this is beyond the basics in that it's role expectations, it's expectations for the onboarding process, anything that the employee needs to be clear on or to understand sits in this clarification side of things. And of course, we then come to connection. So who's who in your crew? Like, what is their team? Who are the people they interact with? What are the ways of working? Do I email my colleagues or do I message them on Teams? Do we have stand-up meetings or do we mostly use Zoom because we're all remote? All of that stuff around being connected to the people you work with sits under this connection header. And lastly is the culture piece. So what are the values of the organization? Who are we? How are things done around here? What are we here to do? All of that cultural side of things sits under this banner. So we'll go through these in a bit more detail, and I'll hopefully bring some color with some examples. So compliance is what I've slightly cheekily called the boring stuff that needs to happen. I don't know anyone who gets a massive kick out of setting people up in payroll and setting up their assets. Maybe I've yet to meet that person. I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But it's things like making sure your employee gets paid correctly and gets paid on time. Making sure they have the right tools to do the job, again, vehicles or software or literal tools if you're working in a trade, making sure they know where the kitchen is, making sure that they've signed off all the policies, they understand what the process is for applying for annual leave, understanding who their manager and who their team are. It's all of that side of stuff. Things that will be hurtful or things that can go wrong on the compliance side starts off with getting paid incorrectly or being paid late. There was some really interesting research, I think it was must have been 4 or 5 years ago because it was pre-pandemic. That's the time frame now, right? As BC means before COVID, not before Christ. So BC before COVID, there is some research that looked at how many messed up or incorrect pays would an employee tolerate before they started looking for work elsewhere. And it was 2, like it was really low. If employees have a messed up or an incorrect pay twice, they will start looking for work elsewhere. Being paid correctly and on time is one of the fundamental requirements for an effective employment relationship. And if you get that wrong, you very, very quickly burn through any goodwill that you might have had. Now, if an employee can't do the job because their tools and system access is late, this is also massively frustrating and they can't actually do the job that they've been hired to do. When reporting lines are unclear, it can feel really uncomfortable about who we're accountable to, like who we need to be informing about our work, who we can escalate to, what might need to be sent to us. So anything around reporting lines, make sure that that's clear and clarified at the start. Where communication is confusing or unclear can be quite uncomfortable, especially when we're in a new environment and don't know how to, we don't have the history or the relationship with the people we're working with to understand whether someone might be joking in a message or an email that felt maybe a bit sharp or a bit abrupt. We don't have the sense to understand who might be more task oriented or who might be more people oriented. So where communication's confusing or unclear, and we don't know how to fill the gap because we don't know where the resources are stored, we don't know what the password to the shared drive is, it's not really clear what was being asked of us, that can be enormously frustrating and will definitely put a damper on your onboarding experience for your new starter. And I flagged this earlier, but if you don't know how to escalate or ask for help, that's immediately incredibly uncomfortable. During your onboarding period, whether that's into a new team or you're brand new into the organization, you're going to have a lot of questions, which is totally normal. That's a part of the process of learning a new business and a new role in a new team. But if it's not clear who you should be talking to and who you should be asking for help, that's going to, again, really undermine the effectiveness of your onboarding process and is going to cause issues for you and your new starter. Now, the reason I spend so much time talking about compliance is because of a model of thinking about benefits and experiences at work that was developed in the 60s called the Hertzberg two-factor theory. So it's from the 1960s. It's an oldie, but a goodie. Certainly some parts of it can be updated, but the findings still hold true. And so what Hertzberg said was that there are two types of, or two categories of, things that we care about at work and things that we respond to at work. On the left-hand side, we've got our hygiene factors, and on the right-hand side, we've got our motivation factors. So your hygiene factors reduce dissatisfaction. If you can get these things right, you will have less job dissatisfaction. So being paid on time, knowing that your job is secure and you're not, seeing rolling restructures all the time, having reasonably good relationships with your colleagues, having an office where the toilets are clean and there's not mold growing on the ceiling. Getting all of those things right doesn't give people job satisfaction, but it reduces dissatisfaction. And then the motivation factors are things that improve your satisfaction. So it's all the cool, sexy stuff that HR people quite like to talk about. So good recognition programs, feeling a sense of achievement, feeling responsible for your work, having opportunities for development and growth. It's all that kind of content. So you can have as many ping pong tables in your lunchroom as you want. You can have the sexiest employer brand. You can have cool morning teas and interesting development opportunities. But if you don't take care of your compliance stuff, if you don't take care of the hygiene factors on this left-hand side, you're going to have people who are dissatisfied at work because your hygiene factors reduce dissatisfaction and your motivation factors increase satisfaction, but they both do different things. They both need some attention. So having hammered home the importance of getting your basics right, let's move on to talking about clarification. So this goes a little bit beyond the basics, and it's mostly about employees knowing what's expected of them. So the things that we can do to improve clarification or to improve clarity as we're onboarding new employees starts with setting objectives for their onboarding program or for their induction program. Whatever language you choose to use is totally fine. So this might be for someone who works in sales, confidently walk a prospect through a sales demo by the end of week 4. That's very clear. It's very explicit. And your employee then knows, okay, so I'm going to need to know the software that our company sells. I'm going to need to know the common objections. I might want to watch a couple of demos someone else has done. It gives them a very clear destination that they're aiming for. Again, if you're in sales, my expectation is that this person has closed 4 deals by week 8. Again, I'm setting very clear milestones and very clear expectations. Or if I've got someone working in customer support, my objective for them might be able to independently resolve all kind of tier 1 customer support requests by week 12. They don't have to be able to resolve every single customer support request. Anyone who deals with the customers knows that their requests are not all super simple or straightforward, but certainly be able to independently deal with most of them by week 12. The next piece around clarity is getting for yourself a reasonably good understanding of your employees' strengths and opportunities for development. So this is around having a clear sense of what they're good at and a clear sense of where they might need some support. And that does a few things. It gives you as a manager a really clear understanding of how you can be effective and helpful, how you can make sure that your team and your employee has what they need to succeed. But it also builds trust in the relationship because your employee is going to know that they are being seen and that they're being recognized, and that whatever support they might need is closer to being available to them because their manager knows what the need might be. So when we're giving feedback, identifying strengths and opportunities for development is step one. The second step is communicating it, which is why it sits under this clarification header. So an example of that might be, hey, Sylvie, I've noticed that you're really careful to follow up with tasks that you've been set. I can see that you're taking notes. I can see that you're scheduling them in your calendar. I can see you holding yourself accountable for this work. Nice one. I really like that ownership. That's good stuff. Keep it up. Or it might be, I'm observing you have a really warm and personable phone manner, Kate. I can see that you take the time to listen to what the customer is saying. I can see that you take the time to empathize with them before jumping into finding a solution. That's exactly the skill that I want to see from you in this customer success manager role. So thank you. I appreciate this. Now, on the opportunities for development side, again, we need to be clear around giving feedback and being clear on offering support as well. So the example I've got here is maybe for someone who's struggling to be prompt with their communications. And it might be, hey, Sylvie, my expectation is that internal messages or emails are responded to within 3 to 4 business hours. That's important because things move pretty quickly here at MyHR, and if you've got colleagues who are asking for information from you, they need to know they can get a reasonably quick response. And if you can't respond within that time frame, that's fine, but you just need to let them know when they can expect to hear from you. So 3 to 4 business hours, what support would you need from me to make that happen? Kind of what can I do to help? The last thing here is around, I think the way that I try to frame this is there is an ownership or a power imbalance piece that has to sit with us as managers and business leaders for keeping channels open for questions and feedback. We are responsible for making sure our employees feel safe enough and are clear enough on where they can go to ask questions or give feedback. It is an ineffective strategy to expect a new employee in the business or a new employee as a member of a team to take the ownership for going and asking questions and getting in touch with people. So by keeping your channels open, what I mean is doing things like setting up weekly check-ins so that your new starter knows they have a window to ask a question or to give you feedback. That's things like reaching out to them kind of one-on-one as you need to. That might be when they do have a question, pointing them in the direction of your SOP so that they can go and find the answer themselves. But basically, we need to model and walk along the avenues that our employees have access to ask questions and to ask for help. We can't expect them to try and find them on their own. So moving into the connection side of things then, this is basically anything which helps a new employee establish and build connections at work. And there are going to be, in everyone who's joining us today, very different sets of dynamics and very different relationships which are going to matter to your new starters. So I thought I'd first talk about kind of your manager and then move on from there. So in terms of feeling connected to your manager, I imagine most of us here will have had our manager at some point, unless you're an entrepreneur from the age of 16, in which case, good on you, that's really cool. But if you think about managers where you have felt connected to them and you have felt safe to reach out and ask for help, think about what it is that they did to make you feel that way. And that's going to probably be things like having regular check-ins and making sure that you are actually available to answer questions or to support. Clearing time in your schedule so that if they do need to get in touch, particularly in those first kind of 4 to 6 weeks, you're not super smashed and they end up not hearing from you for a couple of days when maybe it was just a quick question they needed an answer to. Ask how they're going, like check in, make sure they've got what they need, but basically kind of a combination of operational availability and then a bit of pastoral care just to recognize that starting a new job can be stressful. Some of us are more comfortable with being operationally effective. Some of us are more comfortable with the pastoral care kind of caring side of things. That's totally fine, but you do need both in terms of helping your new starter feel connected to their manager. And then we come to talk about the team, right? So obviously make sure that your new starter is introduced to their team. If everyone's in an office or on a work site, that's reasonably straightforward. You can do handshakes and walk them around on their first day. Where that's remote or you're working in different time zones, that might take a little bit more thought, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come to talking about remote onboarding. But you might have a buddy system if that's appropriate. If there are org charts, you can give your employee a copy of, so they can start to see kind of who's who and what their roles are, whether you do an introductory morning tea to kind of welcome them, if they're shadowing team members to understand how Sylvie's job is different to Ashley's job, is different to Jocelyn's job. Any activities here to help them have visibility over and then connection to the people who are in their team will go a long way towards contributing to an effective onboarding program. And then we have stakeholders. So depending on your organization, depending on the work, who your stakeholders are is going to vary quite a bit. So for most of us, this would be senior management in the business, like knowing who the CEO is or knowing who the chief ops officer is. For smaller organizations, this might be a really key customer who's a significant part of your revenue. In community organizations, that can often be community representation if there are people that you're working with. So whatever the ecosystem looks like in terms of your organization, make sure your new starter has a reasonably handheld introduction to those key people. So that might be introductions to the people themselves, if you can manage that. That might be giving them a debrief about different people's working styles. I know that when I'm managing a team and I've got new people starting, I'm very clear to say that I am going to be more on the personal side of things and less structured. And so if you have a high need for structure, please tell me so that I know that, because it's not where I naturally play. Or it might be giving a person a heads up about someone's history or kind of connection to the organization if that's important. And again, you might have your new starter shadowing people to important meetings so that they can see who's involved and see what the discussions are that are happening. And lastly, I didn't know what to call these people. But it's your helpful humans, the people who grease the wheels of the organization and get things happening. So that might be an office manager or a PA who's really involved in pulling levers to make shit happen. This might be a long-serving staff member who maybe has been in a bunch of different jobs and so has really excellent knowledge of the organization and what goes on. Sometimes they're just helpful people in a team, and again, you might set them up to be a buddy. But I'm sure you can all think of at least one or two people in your organization who are kind of key people to know, not necessarily because they're a stakeholder or they're in the same team, but just because they will help grease the wheels of this person's experience at work for whatever reason. Now, a really quick word on buddy systems. A buddy system is where you assign your new starter to usually someone in the team who's typically a peer, so that they have someone else to kind of ask questions of. What happens with morning tea? Do I need to bring something to contribute? I've got a holiday planned in the next 2 months, kind of where do I go to apply for leave? I've been asked to work on this project, but I can't see the files that I need in our share drive. Where do I go to find them? So any of that kind of stuff. Normally, in terms of finding someone who's a good buddy, you want someone who's reasonably competent and won't be swamped or annoyed by having a new person ask them questions. You want them to be reasonably senior. Well, senior is the wrong word, but reasonably established in the role that they're in. And you typically want them to be a reasonably good holder of the company values or of the company culture, the way that we do things around here. Where buddy systems can be ineffective is where the manager is so busy and so smashed with their own workload that they sometimes consciously, usually unconsciously, hoping to offload a bunch of management responsibility onto the buddy to deal with. So your buddy is absolutely a helper, and your buddy is likely to have useful or insightful feedback about how the new starter is going in their first few weeks or their first few months. But it must remain the manager's responsibility to have those feedback conversations, to give them feedback, positive or negative, and to be accountable for their overall onboarding program. So if you think that you could use a buddy system in a way that was helpful and supported an effective onboarding experience, that's awesome. They can be really effective. Just watch out for your buddy being overloaded and becoming the default manager because your actual manager has too many things on their plate. So we'll come into culture and engagement, and the easiest way to talk about culture that I found is it's how we do things around here. It's the behaviors and the attitudes that we accept and that we encourage at work. So formally, this tends to be things like your organization vision and mission and values. If you have a business or a company strategy, often it's embedded in those. At MyHR, we've got 4 values, and we have a Slack channel where we shout people out for displaying any of the values. If you're interested, they are work together, own it, make it easy, and don't be a dick. So no dickheads at MyHR. And so we'll kind of shout them out and make them alive. But it's the formal or the explicit understanding that this is who we are, this is how we will show up, and this is what we're here to do. It's also your behavior and your beliefs. So you can have an amazing set of values, but if you're not living them, and if day-to-day life feels very divorced from your company values, one, that's an immediate red flag. I would really encourage you to spend some time investigating that and responding to it. But it's all the other stuff. Do we rely on our colleagues to peer check our work? Can be a behavior that's not, it would be unusual to have a value that says get your work peer reviewed. But if it's something that's expected and your colleagues are happy to help out, make it clear to the new starter that the peer reviewing thing is a resource they have access to. And as a manager, equally, you want to be not only kind of governing and managing your employees' induction into the organization and how you do things, you want to be a little bit more alert maybe than you normally would be to behavior and beliefs that aren't helpful. So if you can see a colleague who's more established, close to your new starter, who's having a bitch and a moan about a customer or the way that something has gone, you might want to pull them aside and just say, hey, so-and-so is new. Can we just give them a few months to get into it before we start talking really explicitly like that? Susan, I know that I'm not saying that you can't have a whinge because something didn't go your way with a customer. That's totally cool. All I'm asking is for the next little while, don't do that in front of Sylvie because she's our new starter. We just want to help show her what the accepted and right behaviors are rather than the behaviors that might be okay after a little while. Now, the other thing around culture here is be prepared to give feedback. And this can be positive or negative again, but this is more about reinforcing behavior and less about enforcing or rewarding performance or output. So one example might be, Sylvie, it was great that you put your hat in the ring to pick up that project. I agree. I think it does sit with you and your team, and I appreciate the ownership or the initiative that you took to pick it up. So nice work. Thank you. Or it might be, hey, Sylvie, next time I'd like to see you take more ownership of that particular project. I think it sits with you and your team, and the fact that you didn't put your hand up for it didn't kind of feel like the way I would expect you to go. Would you need any guidance or information from me to feel comfortable doing that next time? And role modeling is critically important. If you as a manager behave in a certain way, you are giving permission for your team to behave that way. So that applies kind of beyond the scope of just onboarding, but certainly when you have new employees who are trying to learn the ropes, it's really, really important that you show up in a way that is intentional, that you show up in a way that is aligned with company values if you have them, and that you show up in a way which encourages behavior that is helpful and appropriate for your team rather than behavior that might not be what you're looking for. So we'll come into remote onboarding. We'll talk a little bit here, then we'll go on to talking about tech, and then I'll jump into the demo, and then we'll finish up and be ready for questions. So we're doing well for time. So remote onboarding is harder, but it's not impossible. And the reason we talk about it now is that in New Zealand, we know that nearly 70% of small and medium enterprises offer flexible working arrangements. That's everything from full-time hours through to part-time hours. That's kind of different start and finish times. That's 2 days in the office, 3 days working from home or what have you. So this means that when we are managing a workforce that isn't physically all in the same place for exactly the same hours, the exact same amount of time, the tools that we have the tools we have access to manage them generally, but also to manage onboarding are much more limited. So as an example, it will be harder to have face-to-face contact, which is quite important for building connection. You don't end up having water cooler chats. You kind of don't overhear things that are happening 2 desks away. Again, important for connection and sometimes for clarification. And there's a high level of trust required because your new starter can't see everything that you're doing as a manager to be supportive, and you likewise can't see everything that they're doing to figure out the role and to get the work done. Now, The good news is that the principles of good onboarding remain the same. Take care of compliance, make sure that they are clear and there's clarification around what's expected. The connection piece needs a bit more attention, as does the culture side of things, but all of those pieces are just as important. So I've yet to see an organization who has had to completely retool their onboarding process because they now have people who work remotely. But I have seen most organizations will need to make a few thoughtful changes to better include people who are onboarding remotely. So what can we do here? And again, the good news is that a 20% amount of effort will address 80% of the issues that you'll experience with remote onboarding. So the first thing is around clear documented expectations. Typically, this means having more things in writing than you might feel comfortable with, whether these are Teams messages, whether it's an email, whether it's a shared document that you're both kind of putting comments in as you go along. Whatever it is, just be really clear to be explicit about it, because it's unlikely that your employee will be picking up expectations by osmosis. Having it documented is going to be much more useful and more sustainable in terms of an approach to managing this. You also might want to have more regular calls between your manager and your new hire or your buddy. So often when we have someone new join us in the work site or in the office together, they can see when we're busy, and so they'll ask questions when they can see that we're free. But when you're working from home or working remotely, that's a lot harder to do. So the recommendation I often make is to say, I know it sounds really naff and it sounds like we're managing 10-year-olds, but instead of having a once-off catch-up on a Friday for 30 minutes, try having kind of a 10-minute catch-up every day so that your new starter knows that they will get at least 10 minutes with you to raise questions, and they're not trying to catch you, but they're not sure what your schedule's like and your calendar looks really busy. They don't want to bother you, and they end up saving up all their questions till Friday when these are very minor issues that could have been resolved during the week. So have a think about more regular contact. Doesn't need to be more overall necessarily, but just, again, owning those communication channels and making sure that we're holding space for our new starters to speak to us. Of course, if you don't have people in person to meet their colleagues, you're going to have to replace that with something else. Whether you use Zoom, Skype, Google Meets, or Teams, make sure you're introing them to their other colleagues. And sometimes this can be kind of a formal meet and greet. Tell us one surprising thing about yourself. If you Google icebreakers, I mean, there's thousands online, so I won't run through them here. But whatever the format is, make sure that you are getting at least some FaceTime with other colleagues. And to add to that point, if you do have a remote or a dispersed team, and you have a communication channel like Teams or like Slack, or any of the other kind of collaboration pieces, I would recommend that you do ask everyone to upload like an actual photo of themselves into their little avatar, instead of a cartoon or just the blank kind of holding image, because you don't have that in office contact. It can be helpful actually being able to see people's faces and go, oh, that's right, that person was customer success and that person was marketing. Oh, that's right, because I remember seeing them. The other piece which can be a bit tricky is there are plenty of unspoken practices in the workplace that you kind of pick up by being in the room and seeing how it goes. As much as possible, you want to document these. One tool that I've used during COVID, actually, when my HR went remotely, but we still had growth and we still had new people joining us, was that each of the leadership team for ourselves wrote a how I like to work document, like a user guide for me as a colleague. And it was things like, here's how I like to resolve problems. Here's how I like you to get in touch with me. I prefer to be called. I prefer to be emailed. I prefer to be Slacked or whatever. Here's the way that I like to work. Here are my working hours. So sometimes even just calling out how we each individually like to work can make a lot of difference when we're dealing with a dispersed team. Where you can, try and book smaller lunch catch-ups between a couple of people. It's bloody intimidating being a new starter on a Zoom call with 30 faces, none of whom you know. So where you can, break down your catch-ups into smaller groups of people so that they feel a bit less scary. And as much as is appropriate for your workplace, if you do have Friday afternoon drinks, if you do have Tuesday drinks, book time for that and make time to connect and catch up. So when it comes to using technology to make onboarding easier, there are a few reasons we do want to use technology here, and they start with the fact that computers are really good at doing things in a systemic, reliable, regular way, and so we want to get them to do some of the heavy lifting. So having a program or a software or a tool that you use for your onboarding will help with consistency. Often different managers find different things important. Sometimes we can be really focused on what matters for our team and maybe not so much what matters for the business, like policies or processes or kind of company values and missions, company value and mission. So you will get some consistency if you do have a tool that allows you to replicate some elements of the onboarding process for every new employee. They can also take care of alerts and reminders. I know that my schedule is pretty packed, and so remembering that I need to find time to do stuff means it has to happen in my calendar. If it's not in my calendar, it won't get done. So tech is really good at building in alerts and reminders and taking care of some of that mental load of remembering what our schedule is, particularly if you have a team with high turnover, if you're working in retail or hospitality or in a call center or in a contact center, having that consistency of reminders can be quite helpful. You can also track progress. I know that when I get to about 2 months of a new starter, I kind of forget what we've covered off. They've been here long enough that they know enough to get in trouble, but I sort of forget what might be remaining. So tracking progress through a program that you designed when you were being thoughtful and being intentional about what someone was going to cover off can be quite a useful tool. And also on the compliance side of things, if you are using a platform, you can do things like sign your policies online. So you've got a record of all of that content. You can record training and capture the training side of things. So where you do have a system that can do this, that'll take a bunch of load off you and take care of some of that compliance side of things. So that is a perfect segue. It's almost like I planned it into a short demo of the MyHR onboarding module. So forgive me while I get set up. I'm just going to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row. What you should be seeing now is the MyHR Launchpad for Sylvie's store. So what I thought we would do is really quickly talk about setting up an onboarding plan for a new starter. So I'm going to go into my business up here on the top. And then I'm going to go here to my onboarding tab. And I'm going to assign an onboarding template to my new starter, Maud. So in MyHR's onboarding platform, you can set up templates. So that's one that you've got existing. You can create a new one. You can have a tailored messages for new starters. So you might say, yo, so great to have you join us. We're the best bloody shoe store in the country. So to have you here. Or whatever tone is appropriate for your environment. So we'll save that. Now, because I've already got a receptionist template, I'm just going to use that one for Maud. So I'm going to say start plan here on the left-hand side. I'm going to go to the receptionist template. I'm going to add it for Maud. I'll hit start here on the bottom. So this plan for Maud is broken up into sections. So there are a bunch of activities that I would like to happen before day one, which makes sense. So she's going to need to review and sign the new employment agreement. I'd like her to upload her KiwiSaver and tax code declaration, provide her financial details, and so on. So when we scroll down, we've then got the day one section. We've got the week one section with training, use of equipment and tools. We'll have a review meeting. There's a month one list of activities and so on. Now, the other thing that's quite useful about this plan is you can assign activities to different people. So you'll see that sorting out Maud's pre-employment assessment results sits with Lucy Leader, so the manager of Maud, and Lucy will get a reminder and will get prompted to make sure that she's done this in the time frame that we've set at the beginning of the plan. Now, it's Maud's responsibility, somewhat unsurprisingly, to provide her financial details for payroll. So she will get a reminder and she will have a task to set that up in the payroll system. Once we're happy with this, we can publish plan on the right-hand side. That will ask me to double check, I'm sure, and I will go yes. And then what happens is a plan is created for Maud that lives on her profile in MyHR. So here we can track progress. I can say that, yep, that employment agreement was signed. I'm going to add a comment saying signed by Sylvie, not Lucy, on 17th October. And then I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to mark it as complete. Easy, so now that task is marked off. Once Maud has uploaded her KiwiSaver and tax code declaration, she can tick that off. We can edit the plan as we go through if we need to, and of course we can close or delete the plan once we're ready. but it's a really useful platform to track what is consistent and important for everyone, to mark progress, to assign different tasks to individual people. And you can also, when we go to overview and we go to my business and we go to kind of our reminders section, we can see what is outstanding. So there's we go to compliance. I can see that I'm still waiting on those health screening results from Maud. I'm still waiting on her KiwiSaver and tax code declaration, so I can chase her up if I need to. And if I wanted to pull some reports here, I would jump into the reports tab. I would then jump down and I would look for my onboarding summary, my onboarding task summaries to get a sense of what's outstanding. So that's one of the ways that MyHR makes onboarding easy. We work really hard to make sure that we are building tools and systems that are useful for small and medium-sized businesses. And the feedback that we're getting from the onboarding module in particular is that it feels like it's the slickness of a more corporate process, but certainly without all the back end and all the hassle and all the requirements to be a larger business. So that was all the content I wanted to talk you through. We're at 1:47, so I'm doing pretty well for time. What I will do is stop sharing my screen and jump in to see if you have any questions at all. So thank you for joining along with the content today. If you have had questions that you've put in as you've gone through, I'll go through and answer them now. If you have a question now that you would like to ask, you're very welcome to do that. And we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes going through those questions before I let you go back into the rest of your days. So let me just scroll through my Q&A session. So Elsie, kia ora Elsie, thank you for joining us, says, for management, how do we make the orientation more interesting? That's a really good question. And I think it depends a bit on what your expectations are of the onboarding process. Like I said, a bunch of it is around compliance. So some of it just kind of inevitably is going to be as process oriented and as kind of nitty gritty as it needs to be. In terms of making the orientation period more interesting, there are all kinds of things that you can do to jazz up what you're already managing in your induction process. Most people like food, right? So having a morning tea or a welcome lunch, if that's within your budget, can be a nice way to do that. We've got a bunch of small businesses that we work with who do like outings. So for a new starter, they will take them to a kind of a key customer site to see what it actually is that they're supplying and why it matters that their attention to detail on projects is really important. So whatever you can do to get people out of the office or off the work site to seeing kind of their work in action is helpful. If you have games that you can play, like a get to know you quiz, or if at the end of month 1 or month 2 you go out and have a meal together, all of that kind of stuff can help add color to the orientation or the onboarding process. But I think what might be important is potentially managing expectations around some of this just kind of has to happen, and there's limited work we can do to make that exciting. But when we're talking about culture and around connection, there's lots that we can do to make our new starters feel more connected to the organization, to the teams. And so that's where I would be putting some time and attention rather than necessarily on the compliance side of things. Anonymous asks, perhaps not super related to today, but now that National has said they will reform the 90-day trial period, how will this affect onboarding plans? That's an excellent question. We will be running a session in the next few months on the employment relations changes that the new New Zealand National Act government are proposing to bring into place. Because this is an NZ and Australian webinar, I won't go into a lot of detail here because it won't be relevant for some people joining us from across the ditch. But in terms of how this affects onboarding plans, my very short comment would be that in New Zealand, a good onboarding plan serves multiple purposes. One of those is making sure that you can use the trial period or the probation period if you have one in place, if you have a new starter who doesn't work out. However, in terms of compliance and managing health and safety and legal risks to your business, in terms of your employees being connected to their teams and to their colleagues, a lot of those needs remain the same regardless of how the trial period might change. So my immediate response is I don't think there would be significant changes to onboarding plans, and I don't know that I'd be recommending major changes. What we want to be taking care of are those compliance, connection, clarity, and cultural needs as well. Elsie asks, is orientation the same as onboarding, and how long does onboarding take? Good questions. The language around this can differ from organization to organization. So some people will say orientation, some people will say induction, some people will say onboarding. Any of those can mean the activities that happen when someone first joins the organization. So broadly, I would say that they're probably the same. In very, very large corporates, sometimes orientation means like a particular week of activities, especially if you have like the large accounting and financial firms will have a bunch of graduates join them at the same time. Sometimes there's like orientation week or orientation month, which is quite an intense period of activities. And then kind of the induction happens beyond that. But most of the time, orientation, induction, onboarding, I would say are pretty interchangeable. And in terms of how long it takes, this really depends. I have yet to see an effective onboarding program that's less than 8 weeks. So at a very minimum, I would say 8 weeks is what you'd be looking at. It depends a lot on the complexity of the role. So if you have an organization or a team where the jobs are reasonably straightforward and reasonably self-explanatory, maybe 8 weeks is okay. If you're working in a professional services environment where the teams and the work is more complicated, anything from 3 to 6 months is pretty standard. So that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. You don't want to overdo it, but you don't want to underdo it and leave people at sea as well. The easiest way to gauge that would be feedback from your managers and your employees. If your managers are saying this onboarding program takes too long, like I need people to be up to speed quicker, that's an indication that maybe you need a bit more support and a bit more training during your onboarding program. If your employees are giving you feedback that they felt like they were kind of left at sea without support too early and they struggle to kind of find their feet, that might be an indication that you want to extend the onboarding program or extend the period of time it takes to manage expectations around what's expected of them. Let's have a look. Carmen, kia ora Carmen, thank you for joining us. Says, I'm loving the MyHR onboarding plan, really useful for process tracking. Love it. Thank you, Carmen. I know the session is all about onboarding, but will we have offboarding plans too in MyHR? The short answer is yes. So we've got a software development program or a platform development pathway where offboarding is a key feature we get requested for a lot, which is great. For the moment, we can build offboarding plans into your onboarding module. If you could drop me an email afterwards, I can talk you through that or put you in touch with our customer success team to do that, Carmen. So drop me an email. For the moment, it lives in onboarding, but yes, there is a plan for an offboarding module specifically to look after offboarding in the near future. So thank you for your feedback about the platform. It's something that we're working on. Joe says, I feel that everything is crying out to be done on day 1 by 9 a.m. and then there is nothing left to do by day 3. What is a good way to split things up so that information is retained and the employee isn't overwhelmed? Oh man, Joe, that's a really great point. I don't know about you all, but when I start a new job, my retention for what happens in the first week is like maybe 15 to 20%. And I think I'm reasonably switched on and reasonably capable. So there is a real balance to strike between how much you cover off with someone in the first week or the first 2 weeks or day 1 by 9 a.m. versus how much they're likely to retain. So Joe, my advice would be figure out what's critical for them to know, like what are the really key pieces of context or the really key process pieces that need to be switched off, and balance the learning with the doing. So anything that is sharing information or showing them how to do something or introducing them to people, all of that kind of lives in the learning part of our brain. And effective onboarding programs tend to balance the learning, this is who we are, this is what we do, with some doing to get them stuck in the first few weeks and to kind of manage that information overload. So that might be, if you work in hospitality, that might be actually getting them to deal with customers and just kind of get onto the coffee machines and start doing some of that work. In a professional services environment, that can be starting to do little bits and pieces with quite close peer review of the accounting advice they're providing or the legal advice they're providing. But whatever that looks like, have a think about how you can balance the learning, because we can't learn 40 hours of content in a week. It's just not possible. So balance your learning with your doing, give them a chance to get stuck in, and as far as you can, be thoughtful, I guess, about how much learning you expect someone to take on and retain, and spread that out where you can. I don't know that I've perfectly answered your question, but balancing the learning and the doing is probably as close as I can get. Anonymous asks, is a summary sheet of what has been completed during onboarding for a particular staff member available after it has been closed? For example, to show during audits that onboarding and orientation has been completed and signed off. Within the MyHR module, yes, absolutely. So there are two places you can access that. On the employee's profile is a summary of their onboarding plan. It lives in their files. Once it's been closed off, you'll always be able to access that. The second thing is that you can pull a report across all of your employees who have had onboarding plans to see what has been done and what was done during orientation. So whether you're looking at a particular employee to see what has happened, or you're looking kind of team-wide or organization-wide, yes, the records of what has been done during the onboarding program can be covered off. Cool. Last question, or second question. The email reminders for the onboarding tasks in MyHR are too much for line managers. Can I change the frequency that they're received and make it so that they get one reminder email outlining all of the tasks required to complete instead of a separate email for each task? Kate, that's a great question. My understanding is that that can't happen, that each task is its own activity, like its own little nugget of something to be done. So the reminders that get triggered off that are separate to that task rather than to the onboarding plan, if that makes sense. What I might do is look into the frequency of emails and see if there's a way that we can change those for your account. I will do my best to get in touch with you this afternoon, but if you wanted to be helpful and just drop me an email with a reminder to let you know, that would mean I have your email address kind of close to hand, and I make sure I don't forget today. So I think the answer is no, but I'll double check and see what we can do around reducing the communication burden of those emails going out to your managers. I understand that would be a hassle. Cool. Donna asks, how does archiving and destroying of employee files happen within MyHR? Good question, Donna. Thank you for asking. So in New Zealand, the law says that we have to retain employee records for 7 years, tax records at 6, and employment at 7 years. So it is totally free to store files and folders and documents on each employee profile in MyHR. That's just a part of the service. It's what you get for your monthly subscription. When an employee leaves your employment, you must keep those records for 7 years after they leave, which in my experience, quite a few small businesses aren't aware of. So again, we make it free to store an inactive employee's files and folders for that length of time. After the 7-year mark, so if someone resigned in, I'm going to do some quick math here, October 2016, and now it's October 2023, there would be an alert which says, so-and-so resigned 7 years ago, you are now kind of welcome to delete their files and destroy their documents. So that's how it works at a high level. On an individual basis, you can go in and add or remove documents as you need to. It's like any filing system, but because of that 7-year recording requirement, we make it really easy to keep and to access those documents. Cool. Those are all the questions that have come through. Thank you so much for your engagement and your suggestions today. A particular shout out to those people who told me that I was sharing the wrong screen earlier. I haven't done that for a long time, so thank you for letting me know. But I hope that was useful. I hope that you have a couple of tools to take away and think about. A lot of you said that you were reassessing your onboarding process or your induction processes earlier. So hopefully there's something in here that will prompt your thinking around changes that you might make. If you would like to get in touch afterwards, you're welcome to email us. My email is sylvie@myhr.works. So SYLVIE@myhr.works. A recording of the webinar will be available to you in the next couple of days once all of the kind of system logging happens. But thank you again so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to speak to you all and to have your questions and comments come through. And I look forward to seeing you next time. So have a wonderful afternoon and we will speak to you soon.